Hey guys, this is the host with another exciting episode from the book of Genesis. In this episode, we're going to look at the story of Abraham and Isaac, which can be found in Genesis chapter 22. So let's dive right into the text and see what the Lord has to say to us today. And just a reminder, if you have not done so already, please take some time after this video to share your thoughts, insights, comments, and questions down below in the comment section. We would love to hear from you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And now, without further ado, let's dive into the text. All right, now looking at the title again, Abraham and Isaac. What exactly does that mean? Well, it means the story we're about to hear has everything to do with two individuals, Abraham and his son Isaac. However, in the previous episode, we saw that Ishmael, Abraham's son, through his wife Keturah, was about to be sent away from the household because he mocked Isaac, Abraham's son by his wife Sarah. In this episode, we all see that God will test Abraham in an extreme way to see if his faith is genuine. Let's go ahead and read our passage together, starting with verse 1, which says, "Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham. And he said to him, 'Take now your son, your only son, whom you love, and go for a walk on the side of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering.'" Right off the bat, I want to point out that this is a continuation of what happened in the previous episode. However, let's remember that in the previous episode, Ishmael, Abraham's son by Keturah, was being sent away from the household because he mocked Isaac, Abraham's son by Sarah. Now, in this episode, we see that God is testing Abraham. And if Abraham passes this test, we can conclude that his faith is genuine. Also, notice the wording here in verse 1 where it says, "Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham." The word "after" here indicates that something happened before this event, which is the testing of Abraham. That something was what we saw in the previous episode. In other words, because Ishmael was sent away because he mocked Isaac, now Abraham's faith is being tested. The second thing I want to point out is that God said to Abraham, "Take now your son, your only son, whom you love." Notice the repetition of the word son here, because Abraham had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. However, Isaac was the son that Abraham loved more because through him, Abraham knew that God would establish a nation. On the other hand, Ishmael was the son that Abraham had through Hagar when he was 86 years old, and it was very unlikely that he would have any other children. And so, the one who was to continue Abraham's bloodline was Isaac. However, in this instance, God was asking Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, his only son, the one that he loved. But let's keep reading to see how Abraham responds to this request. "So Abraham got up early, called his servants, told them to saddle the donkey, and took Isaac with him, and went for a walk on the side of Moriah, just as God had instructed him. But he had a question for God." And verse 7 says, "And when they had walked in the way, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then he said to his servants, 'Stay here with the donkey. I and the lad will go over there to that place.'" Here in verse 7, we see that Abraham was preparing to sacrifice his son Isaac, and while walking, he suddenly remembered the location of the altar. Therefore, he decided to leave his servants and go alone to the place of sacrifice. Verse 8 says, "And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid them on Isaac his son. And he took the fire and the knife, and they went both of them together." Notice the wording here in verse 8, where it says, "Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid them on Isaac his son." Some people try to make a big deal out of this phrase, but it's actually quite simple. In order for Isaac to be sacrificed, the wood had to be placed on him so that he could be raised up on the altar. This is precisely what this phrase is saying. Nothing more, nothing less. So Abraham and Isaac continued their journey until they arrived at the place of sacrifice. Verse 9 says, "And Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, 'My father.' And he said, 'Here am I, my son.' Then he said, 'Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?' Here in verse 9, Isaac asked his father Abraham where the lamb was, because he was unaware of what was about to happen to him. So Abraham responded to Isaac, saying, 'God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering, my son.'" Let's read what happens next, because God will make good on Abraham's promise to Isaac. Verse 10 says, "And they went together to the place of which God had told him. And Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. As Abraham was about to sacrifice his son Isaac, he built an altar, arranged the wood and bound Isaac before laying him on the altar. All of this was a normal practice when making a burnt offering. Verse 11 says, "Then Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But afterward Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, offered him for a burnt offering instead of his son." So Abraham reached out to sacrifice Isaac, but at the last moment he noticed a ram caught in a thicket. Therefore, Abraham decided to sacrifice the ram instead of his son. Verse 12 says, "And it came to pass, as Abraham was about to sacrifice Isaac, that God said to him, 'Do not lay your hand on the lad, or do anything at all to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only one, from me.'" Here in verse 12, we see that at the last minute God tells Abraham not to harm Isaac, because he knew that Abraham feared God. And verse 13 says, "And Abraham looked and saw a ram just outside, whose horns were caught in the thicket, and he went and took the ram, offered him for a burnt offering instead of Isaac." This is the same account that we read in verse 11. And verse 14 says, "Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, 'By myself have I sworn, says the Lord, that because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only one, from me, I will surely bless you and multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven in an uncountable multitude. And I will give to you and your descendants after you the land which you are passing through. For I will double all your descendants.'" And here in verse 14, we see that God will bless Abraham and multiply his offspring like the stars in the sky. And he will also give Abraham the land he is currently passing through. Verse 15 says, "And Abraham called the name of that place, 'The Lord will provide.' And as he looked up and saw the ram, he called the place Bountiful." Here in verse 15, we see that Abraham named the place where God provided a ram, "The Lord will provide." And then he looked up and saw the ram, therefore naming the place Bountiful. That's it. That's the passage of Abraham and Isaac. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. And as we close, remember the words of the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 8, verses 28 and 29, which says, "And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. For whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren." May God bless you, and until next time, Shalom.